We'll confirm that it's working. So Zach, hello, and welcome to the Q&A of Thursday. It is now 17:04 UTC, which is my midday, and we're going to have a fun time exploring NPR today. So for the next hour or so, I have a couple of links, topics, theory. We're going to do a little short exercise with Zach's photos, and we're also going to explore some mind maps, I guess you could say, for 2D stylization NPR to prepare for a short film that I'm currently working on. Not full-time yet, but it will be for a delivery in March next year. So we have Creativette, Slink, Yush, and Zach here. So thanks for being here. And I guess before we begin, Zach, would you like to expand your question today? So basically 2 questions. Hello, Marty.
Hello.
So Zach, I can't hear you at the moment.
Is that better?
Ah, yeah, there we go. Much better.
Gotta have the mic close.
It's all right. And how have you been, Marty?
Not too bad. I had a couple of teeth removed, but that's been taken care of, and now I feel much better.
Oof.
How about yourself?
Doing okay. A little excited because I'm finishing up some renders of a big project I've been working on over the past 8 months. So pretty ecstatic.
Yay.
Yep.
Is that these nuts?
Yes, exactly. Keep it quiet. But yeah. All right, Zach is
Congratulations.
Yeah, finally. Zach has given us a good question, but he's just preparing his microphone right now. So I'm going to read it out now so you guys get some context for today. Hello, Matisse. All right, so today's question and focus is an NPR. Slink from last week asked, what do I think about non-photorealistic rendering, or NPR? And also, what is my preferred workflow for turning real-life places or inspiration into a stylized environment, or animation, or a game? Do you follow some guidelines for keeping certain aspects and limiting unnecessary detail? Or how do you keep the vibe or style? Awful words, he knows. But the real place of a real place while still turning it into a stylized world. Hello, Isaac. Oh, I'm glad you're here too.
Hey, how's it going? Might unfortunately need to dip out in a second. I should be having a meeting right now, but it got pushed back, so I'm gonna hang out for as long as I can.
All right, cool. Oh, that's good.
Awesome.
I'm currently just
Hey Dres, sorry, my mic was screwed up. I fixed it now, hopefully.
Okay, cool, Zach. So you're the VIP today, along with Slink. So, tell me, what's the context of your question?
Yeah, so I was looking for uni to start working with building assets, stylized texturing, that sort of thing. And I wanted to create an environment, like a whole environment around it. And I decided to work on one from real life. And near to me in London is this really weird cemetery. So yeah, I decided to take a whole bunch of photos, but then quite quickly realized I don't really know how to begin from there.
And these are the photos right here.
So yeah, it's sort of, I was struggling with what to take away and what to keep the sort of whole, I don't know, ambience of the place still sort of intact, while also making it stylized.
Oh, great. Okay, so I have a question for you now, Slink. Well, what is non-photorealistic rendering for you? Like, or for everyone, I suppose. What is the concept of NPR? What is the essence?
Like NPR is like I think NPR is like far away from reality, like anywhere address. When you look we say Attack on Titan season 4 and you see the Titans, those are rendered with NPR. And this is like more it's actually just anime in 3D for me.
Okay, I'm just gonna pull up some images. There we go. So you
Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers.
Just throwing it out there.
All right, cool. Well, that's a good concept. It's anything that's not realistic, as the name implies. It's non-photorealistic, stylized. It's got some kind of artistic criteria. So, in order to explore that question, like what is my workflow, your questions are extremely valid. Like, what do you do to stylize an environment? That's a question I ask myself often, and I have used it in my projects before. So to give you some context of my answers, I usually divide my workflow into like a basic art style. So for example, super minimal. This is a character that me and my brother designed that I created and rigged. In the end, I never finished him, but he was more like my little mascot that I created, based on like very chibi, minimal kind of like big heads, small bodies, minimal hands type of design and style. And I would also pitch to my clients a complete style of animation, which is a bit more detailed, a bit more, it's still minimal and things like that, but it's got some characterization, got some concepts, a little more geometric and a little more functional. Also worked with a mixture of mediums to get these characters sorted. So from there, I also mixed the two of like mixed mediums of like 2D, 3D, 2.5D, I guess you could say, characters, and also cutout characters for 2D to create the style of designs that I need and things like that. So all of these are projects that I've done based on what I do. So including, and also on top of that, I have more of an advanced stylization, which is bordering on realism, but it still has some kind of style, like characters like these, which has fur that are not realistic, but they're something. So my criteria is based on my experience concerning MPR is somewhat limited, but I am working on MPR projects right now. And I have done some work through there, and I do have a process. And my process is based on 3 things. So first things first, story focus. Hey, why does it jump around like that? Story focus, design emphasis and selection, and choosing a technique and thriving within its limits. So tell me guys, what do you guys understand of storytelling? What do you guys know about the hero's journey, the monomyth? What's the concept of a story to you?
I had literally actually just finished reading Save the Cat, so I'd say a story is about change.
Yeah, that's good. Anyone else? What else do we have? Before I go on to a big monologue. Yush.
I was just going to say, usually there's some kind of arc.
An arc? Yep.
Yeah, like a character arc or just a story arc, I guess.
Yeah.
Just to make it easy for you, everything you know about storytelling was destroyed by James Joyce.
James Joyce?
Finnegan's Wake and
I don't.
Joyce threw storytelling on its head with his collection of stories, Dubliners, which are not traditional story arcs, but are really first slice of life kind of stories, where there's no arc, there's no resolution, there's no hero.
All right.
I think they're called Shaggy Dog Stories. I think their official name.
Okay. So here's my
stories that don't
stories of what? Pardon?
stories that don't have an arc. I think they're called Shaggy Dog Stories.
Shaggy dog stories.
I learned how to drink warm Guinness from Dubliners. That's the hero.
All right. Okay, well, I'll give you a quick. My take of what storytelling is basically the scientific method. So the scientific method is basically a concept where you have a hypothesis, and you question the hypothesis, you find evidence, and then you prove the hypothesis and make a conclusion. The hero's journey, or the concept of a story, or the way that we process information, is basically that. So if we take a look at the scientific method in images, it will give us a circle. The circle is basically observation, a question, hypothesis, and experimentation and analysis, and then a conclusion. And that is a happenstance very much the same concept as the hero's journey, where we have a setup, we have a question or a push into the story, then we have some information, like we get some allies and enemies and tools. Then we have the experimentation where we approach the dark moment and approach the central question. Then we do an analysis where we get the reward from the approach to the central question, the confrontation. We get a conclusion or a reward. And then from there, we go back to the beginning with the resurrection, and we go back to the story with a conclusion, and we go back to the beginning of yin and yang, light and dark, life and death, back to life. It's the same concept of how we process information and communication. So like subject verb complement, A plus B equals C. It's just a logical process through time, and that's basically what a story is. It's a method of delivery of information, and how do we process it. Hello, Andromeda. Hello.
What are you doing?
We're
Did I miss something?
We're just starting the Q&A, and we're currently taking a look at the things that are used to generate style with MPR to help Zach out with his photo collage of this graveyard, to see if we can like stylize it and go through a process of keeping the vibe of the photography into a non-photorealistic concept.
Wow. Where is this place?
It's somewhere in England, right?
This looks so cool.
Yeah, it's North London, Highgate Cemetery.
Cool.
Okay.
So we are streaming live. So we've got an agenda and about 45 minutes to go. So I got to rush through a big chunk of information, right? So let's go. So basically, you got to go through the scientific method or the hero's journey. And so basically, you got to understand your story. If you understand the story of the graveyard, so for example, here we're in the graveyard. The story is, what do you think the story would be, Zach? Basically,
God,
you haven't thought about it?
Well, the thing, I only took these photos literally a couple of days ago. I've only got one question.
All right, so
Wait. So you have to make a story about the graveyard?
well, yeah, if you want to stylize it, that will help you, gives you some context to understand how you want to stylize it and why you want to stylize it. So I'll give you a quick summary. It's like, I focus on story because this will help you define the narrative of your art style. And this will also give you the tone and what you want to communicate. So for example,
Sorry. Does it have to do something with also form language? Like if you want it to be like a very nice and warm environment, you use like round shapes, but if you want it to be like an eerie thing, you do like sharp corners and stuff. You mean these kind of things?
Exactly. So for example, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You understand it. So for example, what is the tone of the story like? Is it sharp? Is it curved or soft? Is it warm or is it cold? Is it detailed or is it bland? All of these things are part of your story. It's like a mood that you need to think about. And what is your narrative? What is the purpose? So here in the graveyard, for example, you can think about your purpose of the graveyard is to show that life goes on even when the greats die and are buried, right? Another story could be, you could say, for example, the recycling, decay is life. That could be a concept that you want to keep in mind. You could say, decay is life. Yeah, memory dies, but life moves on. So the concept of getting over yourself, getting over the history, leaving a legacy, but the legacy may be useless because ultimately, at the end of the day, stones turn to dust. Plants grow over everything, and the hallways are empty. The hallways are empty, and nobody's reading the text. And everything's kept in the shadows, in the past. So, like, you might not know who this Mary person is, even though she affected these people in loving memory. But for us, there is no connection. So, like, there's a story behind this graveyard, and decay is life. Memory dies, but life moves on. So that's kind of a vibe that you want to, like, transmit in your art style. So you got to think about the story. You got to think about what is the purpose of this area that I want to create in the environment? What's the vibe? And then from there, you can start thinking about the next thing. So a mood is like the tone or mood, as Kate mentioned in the chat here. Mood and feel can help if there's no story or before a story. A story is kind of like a narrative and things like that. Trin asked how long I'm here. I'll be here for another 40 minutes or so. So yeah, so those are like, you got to think of the story. That's one of the key focuses of like your environment building or your art style of NPR. You got to think of the mood, the important aspect of the tone, so that you can figure out what you want to communicate. And then from there, we focus on design, emphasis, and selection. Design, emphasis, and selection, which is, I base it on 3 things. Basically, if you guys have watched or taken the course by Creative Shrimp on NPR, I highly recommend it. He kind of summarized it very well, and there's a couple of free videos. There's also another website called Blender NPR, which I highly recommend. I'll give you this link dump later. But these 3 columns that you want to keep in mind when you're designing is balance, minimism, and maximism. So balance is basically the concept of big, medium, small. Big, medium, small. And when you design something or you think about your art, you got to think about the basic concepts of everything in the universe around the Fibonacci spiral in mathematics, where you have something big, something medium, which is kind of like 2/3, and then something small, which is all the other pieces here that exponentially go around in detail. So when you think of that kind of like that ratio, the golden ratio, as they say in art, it works for everything. It works for like how you design your stuff. So when you think of like, I guess let's open up software and like take an analysis of the photos. So you got to think, okay, balance. If we take a look at the photos, you got to balance. Okay, so here we have, let's take a look at one particular photo just to have a general idea of something that you want. Which one should it be? I like this one. Or, yeah, one of these, any one of these. So pick this one. So here we have a big detail of forest, we have a medium detail of a cross, and we have the small details of the writing on the cross. On the small little graves here, the small leaves. So we have the big detail of the forest, the medium detail of the trunks, the small detail of the leaves. We have the big detail of the rock, we have the medium detail of the shapes that are consistent of the rock, and we have the small details of the text and the little bevels around here. So when you think about balance, you think about, okay, so what are the shapes? Now let's choose another photo just to get a general idea. Like there's this really cool cave that I really liked. This one here, like an open tomb. Super interesting. So here we have the big walls with a big hole made of medium shapes of concrete and slabs of bricks made with small details of the text and the finishes on the actual piece here. So once you see those shapes and the balance of those shapes, then you can start realizing, okay, we have big vines made by medium roots made by small leaves. Yep, you have the general idea of what that's made of to figure out the balance of how you want to work things. And then from there, you can start focusing on minimism and maximism. And so stylization prides in minimism, and at the same time, it exaggerates with maximism. Exaggeration. So stripping and unifying detail for silhouette and line art, I guess you could say. That's the concept of minimism. So what's the big difference between this real photo and a stylized photo? Is because of the technical medium that we're using to illustrate this, for example, oil-based paints or water-based acrylic paints or a pencil drawing or charcoal or something, is we are limited by palette, technique, and the medium to illustrate this. So there are some things that we're going to have to get rid of. So for example, the texture of the moss, the particles of the rocks on the ground, the shading of the concrete that's wet, things like that. So we start to strip away the things that are not complementary to the basic balance of the forms, so that we understand that we're focusing on some things So for example, instead of having dark green, mid green, and yellow leaves, we will just have one constant shade of leaves, for example, maybe with some translucency to keep it nice and minimal or simple. So in that case, you start thinking about minimalism. Okay, what can we strip out and not lose the essence of what's balancing this inspiration? What can we use to like keep it minimal here? So let's choose, for example, this minimal doorway with a wall, which is all, it has three things, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 things. So we have the doorway, we have the wall decoration, we have the destruction of the wall, and the vine growing through it. So the story here is that life overcomes decay. So that means we can add, now we can go to the next step. Maximism, exaggeration. So from this picture here, for example, life with our story that we understand in the essence of this picture, that life overcomes everything. We can maximize this vine, we can maximize the destruction, and we can keep the hierarchy of keeping the wall big. The general structure is fine, but now we can like exaggerate the vine and minimize the doorway, minimize the decorations of the wall, maximize the destruction in the wall, and maximize the vine growing through the wall. Maybe some roots coming out from behind, coming out from the bricks. Maybe more vines on the ground, vines that have destroyed the door. Maximize the vines and to rework the balance inspired on this picture of like there's a vine growing and there's a wall decaying. So those are some things you got to keep in mind. You got to like design your emphasis and your selection of detail by working your balance with texture, color, the Fibonacci balance of big, medium, small details and how they balance each other out. You got to figure out what you can minimize and what you can maximize. And then from there, finally but not the least, is you choose your technique and you thrive in its limits. So there's a short video that a 1-minute video that Alexandrov created, and which is here. Basically, he goes through different art styles in 1 minute, basically. So I can throw that link in. And that will give you a general idea of like, okay, so there are different art styles. So if we go quickly through it, there's like a toon style. Okay, from here, low poly style, toon style. Then there is a pixelized or pixel art style, and he just goes through this comic book style with like comic book shading and line art. Then there's like a painterly, cycles denoising, or a painterly, a non-coherent painterly. Then we have voxel art style, kind of like Minecraft. We have hand painted, oil-based acrylic style. Then we have semi-realistic, which is kind of like exaggerated realism with minimized aspects. Then we have line art, like pencil art, charcoal, whatever. And then from there we also have quantized dithering, which is like from old graphic styles. Then we have bare or malt, which is kind of like a line art, and a mixture of the two. Quantized again. Halftone, which is another comic book style. Cross-hatching, which is another type of like newspaper style. And then we have other painterlies or neural network style transferring. And then we have like grease pencil to work line art and all of that. So we got a whole bunch of different styles. And he's got a whole freaking course based on it. So that's €60, I think it is. And it's got everything you need to know. But basically, when you think about stylization, you got to think about your art medium that you're drawing from. Pardon the pun, but you draw from an art medium. So imagine you grab a piece of paper and you grab some burnt charcoal from a fireplace, and then you start drawing with it to create shading. You smudge the shading with these rubbers, and you use the charcoal to draw the lines. You have some thin charcoal and thick charcoal, and you like the paper's got this very specific texture. And this creates this medium that you want to imitate in CG. So the art medium, but we're all digital artists, so that means you got to think about emulation in 3D space. So for example, we have all these tools here. We have, if I'm in this area here, I have all these CG tools to draw lines, to add line art to objects and things like that. And I have someone at the door. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Give me 1 second and I'll be right back. 2 minutes.
So in the context that Trace is talking about, the difference between a shaggy dog story and a slice of life is that slice of life is minimalism. It's just the necessary details, whereas... Oh, you're back.
Yeah,
Oh,
cool.
shut up.
Oh, no, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just in the context of what you just said, the difference between slice of life and shaggy dog is maximalism. You try and throw in as much irrelevant detail as you can, drag the audience along for as far as possible. Whereas slice of life is minimalism. It's just the details that are barely necessary in order to tell the story.
Yeah, that's a stylistic choice, I suppose. And both are equally valid.
Yes.
All right. Well, when it comes to NPR, non-photorealistic rendering, whether you choose maximism or minimism or a balance of both, you got to think about the emulation in 3D space, the technical aspects, and also think about production efficiency. So we use line art modifiers, the grease pencil, we use watercolor shaders and post-processing in Unreal Engine, we use geometry nodes to instance brush strokes onto scattered different techniques, mainly because production efficiency. When you use a medium, like if I'm using charcoal to animate, I would have to use a sequence of charcoal drawings, very similar to each other, photographed in a sequence, and it can be very labor intensive, and not a lot of people are going to know how I draw. So if I use like acetone or drawn 2D animation or things like that, it's going to be extremely difficult to scale, and it's going to be hard to make everybody draw thousands of frames per minute of animation to get the job done. And so production efficiency is one thing that defines NPR, and it draws from an emulation of an art medium that we draw from. So the biggest concept of like how we understand this is like if you think of anime is inspired from art styles that were invented on acetone, oil-based paintings drawn on like clear plastic sheets. There is a lead artist who draws the line art, and then there are a whole bunch of other artists who fill in the colors or draw in the lines, and then they use like a series of film cameras that takes a picture as they move the clear pieces of art across the frames. And they've had dozens of people doing this, and they just dropped the frame rate, and they recycled a lot of like lip synced frames and things like that to get the animation done. And nowadays, a lot of anime is done in CG, where we have interpolated frames, where we have 3D backgrounds, painterly backgrounds that are taken from photographs and converted to 2D. We have 3D anime characters with rigs, with line art and shaders calculated per frame automatically, meaning that a lot of the donkey work is now automated by the 3D space. And this is the reason being is that production efficiency is basically trying to find the shortest route for maximum creativity and productivity. So do the most with them in the fastest, easiest way possible. And sometimes to do that, we can use systems of like keyframed animation with rigs, interpolation and modifier stacks from the grease pencil, for example, using post-processing to develop the style to give us coherent stylization, or jittered stylization, or windowed stylization. We also can use, instead of using linear straight ahead animation by hand, which we still can, we have the option to do automatic line art, for example. So these are the three things you need to think in mind. You got to think, okay, what is your design emphasis and selection, and how are you going to do your balance, minimism and maximism? What is the story that you're trying to focus on? What is the purpose of the narrative? What is the purpose of the art? what is the tone or the mood you want to communicate? And that's how you define the shapes and the style and the things like that. And also, what is the scientific method for communication that you want to provide? What is the hypothesis, and what is the delivery of your hypothesis? How do you prove your point? So even if your story doesn't follow the hero's journey, or if it does, you're still trying to prove a point. And that is this hypothesis and your theory. Your hypothesis, your theory, and your application, or the test of the theory. So, and then from there, what art medium are you inspired from? Is it like paper cutout? Is it a line art from comic book styles? Or is it like a particular artist and the way he uses acrylic and water-based, which is what I'm being inspired to work from here, if you guys saw me a couple weeks back. Is it charcoal and pencil mixed with all these different art styles? And from there, you figure it out. So I guess you can start thinking about these pictures here and your narrative with this picture here, which is really interesting. There's a headless statue right here with tombs that have been grown wobbly from the soft ground. So this shot here is really interesting. You can think about the story here. There's a big tree that's covering everyone. There's a headless statue. These tombstones are very big but uniform, but they're not uniform because they're all wobbly. Same with the grounds, covered with plants growing in and between everything. Roots and stuff like that. This one's covered in like leaves and things. So here you can like put emphasis onto the crookedness of the tombstones, the size of the tombstones. They're absolutely enormous. The headless concept of the body, and nothing is aligned, everything's disaligned. And you have the big concept of big detail, big tree, and big detail, many, many gravestones. Medium detail, headless statue, wobbly things, the tombstone heads and the bushes, and the small details, which is like the texture of the ground, the texture of the moss, the texture of the statue, and the details of the statue, and the leaves. And then you just focus on illustrating those things. Everything else is secondary, and then you just get your inspiration. Okay, so that's what you're going to maximize, and everything else is you're going to minimize. So you're going to maximize the scale of this particular tombstone to make it really big, the scale of the tree and the lens and where you're going to put the camera, the scale of the statue and exaggerate the crookedness of the tombstones, and you're going to minimize everything else. And then from there you're going to think, okay, I'm going to use line art. I'm going to use, let's do it in 3D here, yeah? So what do you think, Zach? Does this answer your question? Quick summary. It was a big dump of information. Huh?
No, it's absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Especially what you went through with the narrative to move to design emphasis to technique, that kind of series of steps is really helpful for getting a bunch of photos to an actual like coherent style at the end of that.
Yeah, so let's see if
really nice.
Let's practice that out. Let's take that exact shot and we'll work it, yeah? Just to share. Well, damn, what happened? Sorry, let me just use a newer version, a more stable version. Cool. So big question for you, Zach, concerning the next picture that we're going to pick out, with the one with the tree and the crooked tombstones. What kind of narrative do you think is important in that shot? This shot here.
Well, I think because I know quite a lot about the history of this place, because it was one of the first ever private cemeteries when the UK not government, but back in the 1800s allowed such a thing as like non-Catholic cemeteries. It was, you could, the families would have to look after the gravestones. So all of these gravestones are like this because the cemetery doesn't look after them. It's supposed to be the family, these people that look after them. So I think one of the possibly the sadder way to look at this is that basically the entire family is very thin. You know, once the line ends, no one else looks after the gravestone, and that there's probably like something like 4 or 5 what's it called,
Generations?
coffins in there. Yeah, well, there's probably 2 or 3 generations in there, but at least 4 or 5 coffins. And once it's full, then the family stops looking after it, and it just becomes part of this kind of ever-growing scenery of sort of long forgotten families. Quite strange. But,
There's a bug in the add-on. Huh.
a bug in images as planes. That's new.
Yeah.
I didn't think there could be a bug in images as planes.
I don't know, I may have to report it, so I'll just do it manually. And maybe the image format. Cannot read the file. That's why.
That's weird. They're just JPEG images from my camera.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna convert it into another file. I did resize them by batch, so maybe that's why. There you go, it loaded correctly. That means the add-on should be able to work. There's the JPEG PNG. Shadeless auto import. What? Weird. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Got it going. Okay, so let's whip out my grease pencil and we'll start doing some planning, yeah? Okay, so now we know that the family's dead or long gone. It's something that we need to figure out. So from here, I suppose you can start thinking about the concept of what do we want to emphasize. So with that story in mind of your family being perished and that they no longer can look after the things and then everybody decay starts to grow over them, what do you think you should emphasize here?
I mean, throughout the cemetery, it's the stuff that is growing over them, which is probably most obvious throughout this. The tree itself is self-seeded. It's something that will just continue to grow, and more trees will continue to grow around it. And it's also the thing that is breaking up the soil and causing gravestones to tilt in various ways.
Okay, so the tree is super important. Cool. All right, so what else? What would be the secondary detail that we have here that we need to point out?
Well, there's the series of gravestones.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And it would be their sort of positioning. You can see they're originally put in a neat line. And then over time, you see it became more crooked.
All right. Good. What would be
the space in front of the gravestones is where the people that obviously the coffins actually are.
These spaces here, the fine detail, right?
Yeah.
I guess the
text.
What's
weird is the empty space is actually still a series of the empty space in between those two gravestones is still a series of coffins. Yeah. They just used to put people that they didn't know the name of.
Crazy interesting. All right, so that's the fine detail with the text, the things inside the coffin. All right, cool. So.
And yeah, the statue would have been from the head of the family, or the person that usually paid for the gravestone at the start. If someone important who had enough, that statue signifies that they were a head of a big successful family.
Cool. Right. So I guess what we can do is we can create a tree with a sapling add-on. We use it. Add curve view 3D. So add curve sapling tree gen. Okay, so here we have a tree, and we can like handle type vector on a spherical tree. Branch distribution. Changing over red. Douglas fir, Japanese maple. It's probably a maple tree, right?
I don't know. I don't know the original type of the tree.
Okay, we'll just use this for now. So we have like this tree, and then we have that's something that we want to work with. We're gonna use like some random like shapes for the tree. Just have a general idea. We're gonna just minimize the shapes a little bit. 3 circles, and then from there I'm gonna focus on one tombstone, and this one tombstone is gonna be the one with the statue, for example. And we can like use an array. We'll just quickly block it out. So I'm just gonna like create all the elements, and then from there be able to focus on what to exaggerate. So that's the process, I suppose. So I guess for the story of like the family loom, like in this case of like this is the head, and then you can have a decrease of decay as the stones wobble more and more out of shape the further away it goes, with a big tree in the background of these tombstones, and there's a pathway, and then everything's growing over it. So what I would do is I would like, in my scene, I would have the tombstones on the ground here, and then I would have this tree, and I'll put it like this tree right at the end, kind of like dominating, and then just get my camera. Whoops. Look at the tree, set my camera up kind of like this, or design my environment so that this row of gravestones would go towards the tree, and as time goes on I'd have like this broken statue grown over by the plants that I'll design whatever technique that I want.
So as it goes towards the big nature thing as a tree, it would get more and more decayed. Is that?
Yeah, that's my idea, I suppose.
Oh, awesome.
So it'll be more and more overgrown, so that the background is like just pure concept of like decay as you walk further away from the headstone. So I have, and also I'm going to exaggerate the stone sizes by make them like super big so that I can notice that they're but also over time. So this one will be less exaggerated than before. And the biggest stone here is like, rotate by global, move it over here. This one's going to be the biggest one, so make it big and the most fancy. Like a cross or something at the top here. And the same with the like, it has like a statue thing. Alright, so this one is going to be relatively aligned, and then we have the smaller one, and then we have another one over here which is going to be super crooked, and then finally but not least we're going to have one that's like almost dead and broken over here. And you can use as many as you want, just focusing on the rhythm to drive that shot with this big tree over dominating everything over here. So I'm going to apply this baseline, and I'm going to just grab this shot here, and now it's just like everything's getting more and more crooked over time, so that my shot is understood that time is, there's a linear time, right? A linear time frame is destroying the everything else. And then from there, I can like use my grease pencil or whatever, or start creating my art style to complement what I want to do. But that's basically okay. So now I've started to create my stylized environment. Maybe I used a realistic tree, so maybe I could redraw that or recreate that, use my low poly art style that I want, use some line art. So for example, get my grease pencil and turn on the modifier, like the line art modifier, choose the collection called mesh, and choose the lines and target material black. And then from there, add a modifier. And I like make it a swirl rim, not sure yet. And then start working on the width of that particular line. So here's in the style, change the thickness a little bit. Make sure it is right in front so that it doesn't stop. This tree, I don't want it in the line art, so I will remove. And just refresh the viewport, and then from there start working in the colors and details and palette and things like that, depending on the art style that I want. And then I can use my compositor to get in the right colors, all the information that I need, or use geometry nodes to instance brush strokes or whatever that I want, or coherent stylization. But basically my thought process was, okay, I had a story, I had my medium, large and small elements thought out. And now I have, like, I'm using the purpose of the art medium and the limits of the line art and things like that to create what I want, to put emphasis on what is medium, what is large, what is small, how am I going to balance it, and so forth. To explain that at the beginning, the family was really predominant with their looking after the graves, but over time they have perished. And at the end of the line, nature prevails, and there is just broken pieces of rock underneath the trees and the vines. And that's how I would start creating it. Make sense? Does it help you, Zach?
It's amazing. Thanks so much. Really, really great start for this kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, really enjoyed just watching the block out process. That was super quick.
Yeah, Blender Royale style, I suppose.
You've had enough practice on that.
It helps. So if I'll save the scene, yeah. And so I guess I'll give you another idea of like, okay, so how do we do emulation, right? Because that's a very big process, because now it becomes a lot more technical. I have a bunch of videos called Coherent Stylization that I'm going to give you guys a big ass dump of links, because coherent stylization in 3D is really difficult. It is something that is like something really hard to do, because you have the biggest issue with stylization is you have the concept of post-processing giving you a technique called window. Here it is, coherent stylization. Coherent stylization is a hybrid. Okay, so this is a hybrid of styles, which requires 2D aspects plus 3D aspects mixed together, all right? And then we have jitter stylization, which is basically just simulated 2D. And then we have, whoops, where to go? There you go. Then we have windowed stylization, which is kind of like a 3D aspect with a filter, pretty much. So when you talk about coherent stylization, with all these videos and things like that, you think of like, I showed this the other day when I was talking of NPR, is like there's papers you need to think about of like, okay, you have hatching, dot paint strokes, or any type of others. But the idea is you gotta make sure that there's a fractalized distribution of the brush strokes based on distance, so that the pictures don't lose their particles or the brush strokes when you zoom in and out in the 3D space. When you change the camera angle, the concept of the paint and brush strokes has a constant density. with fractalized distribution. And this is basically the concept of coherent stylization that you need to keep in mind when you do MPR, painterly concepts. Same with like the fading, so there's no popping of the particles and things like that, and that there's no alpha clipping and things like that. So technically, it's coherent stylization is a technical concept that's a little bit difficult to do digitally, but it gives you a very fine balance between what is a 3D object in 3D space with 3D camera movements and animation versus using an actual 2D flat drawing. So it's kind of like you're minimizing your art style based on the inspiration of the brushstrokes. So you have this 3D model that's rotating, but it's completely flat based on its own lighting, with its own specular and brushstrokes and everything that you've designed inside the area. So this is called coherent stylization, and that's something that is a hybrid of 2D and 3D that you want to keep in mind when you design your render engine. And this can be achieved through using your zeta depth and post-processing, or you can use particles and like other systems and normals and things like that, normals transference and all of that. But you got to keep those things in mind. And when it comes to jittered stylization, it's kind of like you're using like a grease pencil that is drawn over a rig, and you rig the grease pencil, but in order to make it feel like it's 2D over the frames, you pretend it's drawn by hand over the sequence of time. That's jittered stylization. Basically, it's within the line art that you're using. And then you have your windowed stylization, which is forget all the perspective, just throw on some filters and use these filters using artificial intelligence or post-processing filters and things like that to pop out the styles, cut the colors, and minimize and achieve the stylized look that you want in the final render. So I'll give you those links, and I have a couple of like Twitter stuff that I just yesterday and today of my likes and feeds. It's just everybody where there are different styles of stylization, but each one has a different purpose to how you want things to do and how you want them to do it. Like 3D sketch art, it's really beautiful. Grease pencil is beautiful for that. That could be your art style that you want. There's a mixture of other art styles out there. There's line art, automatic line art on geometric shapes. There's a really cool add-on by Calypsy and others to help create different types of line art or cartoon style arts and things inside Blender. You can also, like, stylization doesn't have to always be about the art mediums. It could be a mixed medium, kind of like a Gumball, Amazing World of Gumball, or this Pickle and Peanut show from Disney, where they mixed photos of a peanut and a pickle with 2D art. It's zany. I just learned about this the other day. But basically, you gotta, if you go through the motions of the workflow, okay, so what is the tone or mood, and what is the narrative that I want to express with the art style, and what is my inspiration of the art medium or the fusion, and then going through the process, okay, so what do I minimize, what do I maximize, how do I balance it out, will help you design your stylized animation. And if you keep these concepts in mind of production efficiency, like, okay, how can I stylize it and mass produce it so that I can do animation without too much work and cost, so that I can maximize my creativity, maximize the user audience's imagination from the style, and maximize the concept of the art and the story that I want to communicate. So it's all there. That's basically, that's the thought process you go through, and I hope that answers your question. So thanks guys for being here. Thanks for the time. So do you have any more questions?
It's really helpful.
Yeah. Anything you want to go in deeper, or any other questions, or do you guys want to share something about this? The mic is open now. Ah, Marty had to go. So Kate, I'm glad you made it in pose. Cool.
Yeah, I don't care for NPR.
Though you do it all the time, that's a crazy thing.
Yeah, I still hate it though.
You're such a realism guy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
What about
I guess
you?
my question is there is there a difference between how you would approach? I guess the first bits were the same, but for the sort of second part which you were talking about, for animation versus say for like games or areas which have sort of more sort of three-dimensional environments where it doesn't matter so much about where the camera is positioned.
Games?
Yeah, I was just thinking because you said near close to the end you had like a production for animation section where everything is sort of aimed at the camera in a sense. But if say for is there any difference for like if in games where you have to sort of construct an entire environment, or say you have to do stuff for a different engine, like you have to go from Blender to Unreal or Unity or Godot or something like that?
I guess the big difference with like game engines is that you're going to have to use a concept of coherent stylization in your post-processing to make sure that your brush strokes don't jitter and freak out the user. It has to be coherent and stuck to the 3D space to make it easy on the eyes. So for example, this guy here with his painted world effect with his Patreon post, he's done an excellent job of a coherent stylization inside Unreal Engine. They're all 3D models, but it's got this really beautiful customized post-processing effect that is not a windowed effect. It's more of a 3D effect on top of the world using the normals and the depth of the actual geometry. And that is, I think this is probably one of the best examples of coherent stylization that I've seen, which I think is really interesting. Like, notice there's no popping. There's this really interesting vibe going around. And in the distance, it kind of like, it doesn't compress the brush strokes. It's all very consistent over the depth of the world. And I think, and it still allows for 3D movement around the world.
Have you ever seen Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword?
I have.
One of the tricks they did in that game was they would dither stuff out in the distance, like LOD. They would start dithering the colors to make it look like an impressionist painting from afar. So like when you see that game even on, I think it was Wii when it first came out, it looks gorgeous still because it's all just low poly stuff that's textured normally, and then it's all post-processed to look like a painting. And the further away the stuff is, the more dithered it is, and it looks like it was hand painted in the distance. It's such a cool design.
Yep, and I think that's...
But it's a great marriage of like just making some decent models and then post-processing your look after.
Based on the depth, which is compositing. Kate wants to express that one thing earlier she wanted to express was perspective, depth, and stuff that are also up in the air when working out NPR style. Physics bow to you. That's right. For example, with your story with games, you need depth, especially if it's a 3D world, so you need to think about how do you work it. Same with like Into the Spider-Verse. With Into the Spider-Verse, they used chromatic aberration and tint bleed with depth of field, because that was the purpose of like destroying the background, just like the printers would destroy the print inside a comic book, or emphasis on the depth of field for the cinematography that they were using. But if you're using something a little bit more abstract, like let's see if I can look at my links. For example, this artist here, Twitter, John Lauren, with his art style, his purpose was based on the elements of the story. That it's a zany world, nothing's aligned, people are yelling with big mouths. The mouths of what they're saying is very important, and the proportions. His distortion is almost like a fisheye lens with almost very little perspective to drive the story. Emphasis on the big giant tracks of the tank with the inefficient concept of its gun, the very loud big giant whistle and giant microphone, and his helmet. They're blinded. They're almost like his helmet's over his eyes and they can't see the dangers of the robot, and they're being aggressive about it. and the robot has very tiny hands because in reality it's harmless, and the planes and the helicopters are tiny compared to everything else, right? His concept of his story that he wants to express with his art style is maximizing the elements of the story and minimizing everything else. In other words, perspective, depth of field, balanced light, even like geometrical detail in everything, to keep his shapes focused on the general emphasis of what he wants to say. Same with this artist here. These are just artists I found today on my Twitter feed.
I think just for the other one, I saw it, by the way, the Bean book on my feed yesterday. I am in love with that color palette and everything about it. It's as far as I know anyway, like I'm pretty sure it's 2D art, and I disagree politely with some of the points you mentioned for it. But to me, I think there's been choices that are made more, I don't know, just for the sake of visuals, like the army guy or whatever that is with the radio and stuff, like how his hat is covering his whole head basically, or most of it. I think like what you said is like I think that would have had something to do with it maybe, but to me I think a lot of the choices in here are made just like for the visual appeal, and just like exploring I don't know, just exploring like really wonky, exaggerated features. It also does like reflect elements that you said of like it's, you know, emphasizing bits and minimizing other bits.
Yeah, I guess that's a delicate subject because some artists are not, they're very intuitive. I guess my mind is very analytical and structured. So to me, like for me to do art like this, I would really need to understand the purpose to recreate it. So for me, my design with animation, or my work in animation and my concept of like rigging and building 3D has created a kind of a constructive mindset. So you're quite right. You don't have to be, you don't have to think about these things to do a good job of it. And you can work within your limits of the medium and design it just straight up based on the aesthetic or what you're good at or what you like to do, what you intuitively have done. And make it work without needing to understand the story, without needing to understand the structure and break down the pieces. Because you intuitively know how to do it already. So yeah, you're quite right. You don't always have to follow the formula, I guess you'd say.
I think just another thing I want to add is if some stuff, I don't want to say like intuition isn't part of it because I don't know about that, but there's like, I don't think that artist, like the stylistic choices and stuff like that, all of that would have been from, it's not just like a thing of like, if you aren't born with that, like that sense or feel for it, like then you can't go down that route, or like there's different ways that you're born into for things. I think it's just, there's a lot of work and studying and conscious exploration and practice that went into developing the skill set that artist needed to be able to maybe like go kind of loosey-goosey with color and stuff, but keep it like cohesive. But I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say is no matter people's approach, like there's always a lot of skill and effort that's gone into them. So just like with yours, like you have a lot of experience and skill behind your method, and which is obviously valid, and theirs is too. Just sometimes like the sort of, I'm not sure if this is what you meant, or if this is just sort of what I'm.
Yeah, I think you got
too
it.
far into
No,
just
I think
like
you got it right. You got it right.
Yeah, like the intuitive art, the sort of talking point when people say like, oh, well, this artist has like an eye for it, that, you know, like they were sort of, when people sort of make references to like it being this innate skill that you can't help or can't change, I think that's crap.
Yeah. That's I wasn't referring to like that concept of like innate talent. To me, intuition is kind of like trial and error. To me, it's the process of like doing it, seeing if it works, then revising the workflow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm quite used to. Sorry, I'm distracted by the visuals. I haven't seen this short yet, but I'd love to look at it.
Do me a huge favor, Kate, and apologize 6 more times.
No, don't worry. Don't worry.
It's my quota.
I know.
For the day.
I got one too.
It's mandated by them. Yeah, I'm just. I think maybe it's. I don't know. I'm used to. I have a conversation to that style, but with people I'm used to.
Доброе утро.
Like intuition, words like that to mean like, you know, like innate talent that you're born with, which I think glosses over like all the effort that has gone in behind every artist.
Ну, там мало что интересного. Конечно, картина, мне кажется, более интересная. Если Кандинский.
Maybe I'm thinking of Hero's Journey now. Anyway, yeah. I 100% agree with what you've written.
Yeah, because either way, any piece of art takes a lot of work, no matter which route you take. I think, yeah, I mean, nobody's born with it, and it takes effort. I guess my topic, like, where it might be a little bit hard to, maybe it was difficult to understand, was the production efficiency, the shortest route for maximum creativity and productivity. I think this is mainly just for like the total sum hours to get the job done. So for example, Wolf Walkers, that won a lot of awards on Apple TV, the movie, they used CG elements to help draw in their art style and for the environments, mainly because they needed to they did an incredible job. But like, you look at their breakdowns and they've used a lot of CG elements. Or for example, How I Lost My Hand on Netflix, they're also developed in Blender. They rigged the hand and then they draw on the line art, or they use the line art from there, and then they use different elements in the 3D world to create their concepts. So they were using some kind of rotoscopy, some kind of 3D rigging and other things to help them do what they wanted to do with their art style. Got their work done. Yeah, just to clarify, yeah, you're right, Kate. Wolf Walkers had CG elements in the forest chase scene, but the film was predominantly 2D. I personally haven't seen it, so I only just saw the breakdown of the scene.
I highly recommend it. I know it's on Apple TV, but there's a lot of ways that people can see things. Wink, wink. But I highly recommend it because it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's
fucking pirate over here.
So when it comes to the shortest route, it doesn't mean like don't be intuitive or don't do this or don't do that. It's more like see where you can optimize the workflow, basically. If you can cut corners and the end result is very similar to what you wanted to do with your creativity and it's very productive, then do it. That's why we have computers. That's why we're using systems that help us to paint pictures real time, pretty much, or paint pictures in a short amount of time, to draw all of our frames that we wanted to draw without needing to draw them over and over and over again, and at the same time help other people to do the same type of quality of art that we can do without demanding them to have the same skills and drawing set that we have. So it's kind of like, it helps us, when you think of the production efficiency concerning the art style, you're thinking about how to make sure that everyone can work in the same art style and how we can make the most of the tools to get the job done. And that's where we can work with Coherent Stylization and use rigging and keyframe animation instead of straight ahead animation. And we can also use automatic line art to help complement the amazing artist. For example, my brother, Teleporta, he's an amazing straight ahead animation artist. But it took him a very long time to get away from Flash to use Krita to start animating with Krita. And sometimes he uses the liquid deform brush to get his animations done. And maybe one day I can convince him to use the grease pencil, who knows? But he's my little stubborn little brother, so I don't know if I can until I actually have done it myself.
He's actually trying.
He is?
So, yeah.
Oh, cool, good.
Yeah, okay.
But it's taken him years. I sit down with him, I show him the tools, I work with him. It took him a whole year and a half before he even used Krita. But anyway, so my little brother. But basically, it's that. That's what you got to think about when you choose a technique to make MPR. It's like, what are the tools? How are you going to make it work? How can you make it productive? Cool. Thanks, Kate. I really appreciated that. And I think I will stop the stream here, and I'll let you guys go, and I'll get back to work and have some lunch. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your curiosity. Zach, I hope it helps you. Slink, if you're watching this later, I hope this also helps you too. Thanks Yush, Priman, Matisse, Lech, Create Tibet, and Natrin, and Andromeda for being here. And Kate.
Thanks very much for all this information. Very helpful.
Yep, thanks, Trace.
Thanks again, Dre. That was fantastic.
Yeah, let me just give you the course of the MPI Shrimp, Creative Shrimp course. His link's there. It's like €60. Highly recommend it. There's a really big Blender community for MPI, which I also highly recommend. I'll link you that too. And there's a animation and stylization Pinterest board that you can take a look at that I found just on Google, just to get your feet wet. And then I have my Coherent Stylization study list, which I can give you guys as well. So the Coherent Stylization, I highly recommend you watch the videos, check out the tools from Unreal Engine, which I think is really cool. Hopefully in the future, Blender will have real-time post-processing, and this will open up so many doors. But till then, you can use Unreal Engine or even Unity or anything else, and now you know what you guys need to do technically, creatively, and I don't know, I guess work it out later. So thanks again, guys.